So we did have or listened to a hearing in Topeka this morning that could impact the baseball complex, and the hearing went fairly well. And so STAR bonds, we believe, are still protected for us to build that new stadium. Heard some complaints from a few folks about back to that issue, why are we taking out a historic stadium that's been around since the 30s? The reality is, at first we wanted to save that stadium. But after we did some testing from some very credible engineering firms in this city, we have found there is no way we can save the stadium. The concrete is deteriorating to the point where it's not safe. It will have to come out. We have to clear the stadium. The infrastructure underneath is crumbling. So there just isn't anything to save. So this whole notion that we're tearing down a nostalgic ballpark is a little ridiculous, because those are people that don't have a clue what they're talking about in terms of what can be saved and what do we do going forward. So we think we're in a good spot. But let's talk a little bit about my trip and the trip the council took recently to Washington, D.C. We had a great series of meetings in Washington, D.C., not only with our congressional folks up there and their staffers, but we had a really good meeting with a wide variety of different departments, and I'll kind of go down that list. So we met with Amtrak with an opportunity to look at potentially applying for what they call our CRISI grant programs, and that stands for Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Grant Program. We think that we may potentially have an opportunity to bring passenger rail back to Wichita. There could be a place for that, to have a ticketing office there in the old Union Station. And this program would help us do some of that with some resources from the federal government. The beauty of what we think can happen now is it's really not going to take a major investment on the part of Kansas to bring passenger rail back. And that's the reason why we're all kind of excited about it. So we had a good meeting with Amtrak. We also had a good meeting with the EDA and met with them to talk about some opportunities along the lines of economic development that are unique. EDA has a program that is called America's Competitive Exchange Program. It's called ACE. They believe we would be a perfect candidate to be a host city for ACE. ACE, and you can get into, I'm not going to totally get into the weeds, but it's a program that encourages cities to be a host site, and you bring people from all over the world, potentially investors that will come in. And when ACE qualifies you, or when EDA qualifies you to be an ACE host site, there's nearly 100% guarantee that you're going to get foreign investment, because they qualify you before they allow you to be a host site. And so that was a promising meeting. We also met with the Bureau of Reclamations. The Bureau of Reclamations has had a program that would reinvest in our aquifer storage recharge. There's about $20 million that were left sort of owed to us on the ASR program. We're trying to get that reinstated, and the Bureau's been very helpful in that process. We met with the EPA. We are looking at potentially doing some applying for WIFIA grants that would help us potentially build a new water treatment facility. And so we are looking at, and we have hired a local firm. Actually, it's a conglomeration of local firms that are helping us with that application process that started in January of this year. The deadline is June. It again looks very promising, but the EPA will be handling those WIFIA grants, and we had a great meeting with them regarding that. We met with the Department of Transportation. It gave us another opportunity to visit with the Department of Transportation about our number one project, not only in this region, but certainly within the top 2 or 3 projects for the whole state of Kansas, and that's where we have 4 highways come together on the north part of this city. So I-135, I-235, K-96, and K-254 is the #1 project, and gave us an opportunity to share that with the Department of Transportation, who had met with our county counterparts, and they shared that same information with the Department of Transportation last week. So it gave us an opportunity to add emphasis to a project that is really the last hurdle to complete our infrastructure in this city in a way that will ensure that we can travel to and from in a convenient fashion. The major issue with that exchange, not only does it turn into a parking lot, the accident rate is 70% higher than any other highway in the state of Kansas. Any other highway in the state of Kansas. So incredibly important, we think, to keep our citizens safe. And the only way we can do that is make the needed changes to that North Exchange. And then, of course, we met with our congressional folks and their staffers and had a great series of meetings with many of them. And so that's a brief update on what we did in D.C. The other opportunity that I had in D.C. was my second meeting to be a part of this infrastructure committee group. And again, it's a group that's trying to push some new opportunities out to cities, rural America, a wide array of infrastructure issues that include roads and bridges, water infrastructure, rural broadband. First meeting that I attended at the White House included a lot of key staff people, included Ivanka Trump, President Trump, several governors, General Kelly, Director Chow, the Director of Commerce, Secretary Chow, and there were about 22 people at the table, probably another 25 people in the room. Alan King attended with me. This meeting that I had in DC last week, same infrastructure focus, slightly different group. There were only a couple of us that were from the very first meeting, and this meeting was all mayors. There were only about 5 mayors at the first meeting. This meeting was nothing but mayors. There were about 20 mayors in the room. And we had, again, a good meeting focusing on a couple of things, but primarily focusing on the regulatory environment. We think that we'll have the ability to put together something that Congress can get behind that can help us with some of those projects. That the project I mentioned to you, if we can fix some of those things in the regulatory environment, not trying to get around any laws, just expediting the process, it could save us tens of millions of dollars. And that's partly our frustration with the regulatory environment now. And it's, some of it's some common sense things. Today, they don't allow you to go through the permitting process concurrently. You have to get maybe your NEPA permit, finish that before you can go on to maybe your Army Corps 404 permit. You can't do them, at the same time, and that's delaying the process. And so we fear if that process, as it sits today, would continue to have that same regulatory environment exist, it could delay that project for 4 or 5 or 6 years when construction costs continue to escalate, traffic numbers continue to escalate, and unfortunately, potentially very damaging accidents would continue. Again, it's already today 70% higher than any other highway in the state of Kansas. So we need to fix that. So it's a good group. We think that we'll wrap up our work within another 1 or 2 additional meetings. And so I potentially will go back to the White House for a couple of more meetings, but I've appreciated being at the table. It was a wonderful opportunity to be invited to be a part of this group, and I'm glad that we're able to participate. So at that point in time, we'll open it up for any questions.
What kind of response did you get from the transportation about the 254 K96 135 project?
So they've guided us to potentially placing some applications for some other grant monies that would be perfect for that project. They recognize that that's certainly an issue that we need to address. And they're willing to maybe guide us to some places where we can get some help from the federal government to help address some of that. And we're not asking for the federal government to pay 100% of our traffic issues. We know that we have to step up. We've done that before. We've primarily built Kellogg, with the exception of these last two projects, with all local dollars. We recognize that we need to take care of our own problems. At the same time, I don't want my tax dollars to go pay for 100% of some project in Maine. I think there's merit when local folks take care of their own needs. But there are opportunities where these come together to help in some way. But if our help's only the regulatory environment, I think that goes a long way for us. But they shared with us that there may be some grant opportunities for us.
And then what were your thoughts on, I heard you got back for the Saturday games in the NCAA tournament. What were your thoughts on how the city did with that?
So we really had an incredibly successful hosting of the first two rounds of the men's NCAA tournament. I participated, fortunately, in the Saturday games and was able to go out there and enjoy, watching the games there at the arena. The crowds were phenomenal. Our staff was incredible. My wife and I spent a big chunk of Saturday down there, including the parade that went on in Delano with the largest crowds ever. We came back for the evening games and parked at Lawrence Dumont and rode the queue line over, which was very easy to do, and then rode the queue line back to our car at Lawrence Dumont. We're not the only ones. I looked at the numbers that were given to us during the Thursday through Saturday tournament. 15,000 people used the queue line. So we had another successful opportunity to provide transportation. Understand again, when we looked at that queue line before we bolstered the hours and the route last year, we were only averaging 4,000 riders a year. 4,000 riders a year on the queue line. We had 60,000 riders use the queue line from May to December. We had 15,000 riders use it in the 3 days of this tournament. And so it, again, gave us an opportunity to show what we can do in the core of our city. Lots of compliments on our police department, how they interacted with the community. I saw our interim transit director, who probably spent the entire 3 days down there, but he was down there all day Saturday, making sure that the buses were running and everything was on schedule. And I can tell you, nobody had to wait for that kind of transportation, but Scott did a great job of being right in the middle of all of that action. And that's the kind of people that we have that are thrilled to be a part of this city and provide the kinds of services that our citizens really like to have. We have people that really just stepped up. And so it was a very successful tournament. My understanding is we are the only host city that had 13,000 people show up for practice day. I was told that someone that was in San Diego, and that's a large stadium, that less than 200 people showed up for practice day in San Diego. And so we just did some things that were unique to host cities. I think we'll receive a very good report card. My guess, it will set us up well as we try and secure further dates in the future.
Have you gotten any feedback from the NCAA at all?
Not yet. I haven't. I don't know if others have.
You were talking a little bit about the baseball stadium earlier. Is there any update on potential teams?
So we're still negotiating, and no update yet. But the fact that we hope that the tools that we need to build the stadium are still in place, and that's the most critical part of that. But it's still coming together.
Obviously, the Wingnuts are still going to be here in Wichita. Have you
Correct.
spoken with them? And
We have.
I think those two teams work together.
Right. So we don't know all of the details of that yet. We also know that we're going to have to move the National Baseball Congress tournament. Don't have all of those details fully worked out. Looks like they may move over to Eck Stadium for a year, and then could permanently move over to Eck for the play-in week. We don't have all of those details worked out, but it's still moving forward. The reality is, again, can't emphasize enough, wish we could, the old 1930s ballpark, there's just nothing to save.
And of course, no changes until you actually start breaking ground.
Right. Well, thank you all for coming.